Recording.
Here we are.
We are recording right now, and I am so pleased to be in conversation with Dr. Sally Campbell Galman. Dr. Galman she has lots of different ways of saying her last name. So I'm choosing one. I could not go wrong from previous conversations, she said to me. So Dr. Galman has an enormous body of work that I admire, and the one thing that I admire about her work is the fact that she tries to think of new and inventive ways to do things, and perhaps even challenge some of the ways we come to understand qualitative work. So with that, I want to first thank you for your time that you're giving to our students. They are going to benefit so much from hearing from you.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, as always. It's such an honor to be able to speak with you and to have someone interested in what I have to say about all these things.
Of course.
So, great. Yeah.
So I'm doing this for a class where often students are writing, and they're writing, they're usually doctoral students. So they're writing their proposals or they're writing their dissertations. And some of them are writing their research papers. And we talk a lot about writing practices, like what is your practice? When do you write? How do you write? Do you have music around? Is your space clean? Do you write in messy? Do you read and write at the same time? So could you talk a little bit about your practice of writing?
Okay, well, writing. It's taken me a really long time to figure out what I need to write. And I'm 43 years old. So when I say a long time, I mean a long time. I've been in this gig for a long time, and I'm still kind of figuring things out. And I think the most important thing about your writing process is to experiment with different things until you figure out what you need. I have to have a really clean space to write. That's why I can't work at home. I have children and cats, and it's small. So I need a clean space. I need things to be relatively quiet, and I need to have the stuff that I need. And that means I need to be working on a computer or my tablet for when I'm drawing, because that's another kind of writing. And then I also have my trusty notebook, my little Moleskine notebook, to make notes, because for me there's something about having the typing that I'm doing and then also having another place to make notes in a different format. And I'm not sure why it works, but that's something that I do. I also believe in the 15-minute rule. I know there's all these books out there about write your dissertation in 15 minutes a day, or do this in 15 minutes a day. People are like, oh, you can't possibly do it in 15 minutes a day. But it works. I don't know why it works, but it does. If you just commit to 15 minutes a day, the point isn't that you're just going to write for 15 minutes and it will magically get done. It's that if you tell yourself you only are going to write for 15 minutes, you're able to sit down to do it, because it's not the doing it, it's the dreading it that keeps you from writing. So I tell myself I just have to sit for 15. I sit down and then I stay for 45, because once you get going, you're fine. So I do believe in that. I also believe in only working on one project at a time, or at least keeping a hand in with one project for a chunk of time. I say that I have 7 different projects right now that I'm working on, and it's a little bit difficult to navigate all of that. What else about writing? I tend to be very gentle with myself when I'm writing, and I spend a lot of time writing the naked draft, where you just write down everything you can possibly think of. A lot of times before I write, and I'll show you some examples, I web things out in my little book here. Here's another one. That helps me stay free and away from kind of the judgment implicit in a Microsoft Word setting. So I get it all out there, and then I hammer it in, because you can't, if you start, for me anyway, if I start with the genre, if I start by saying introduction, theoretical framework, literature review, methods, it's going to come. And I need to get the idea rolling. I need to map it out. I need to do it by hand. I need to have a free write, those kinds of things. For drawing, which is a different kind of writing for me, because I'm a cartoonist and it's part of my academic work, I have this whole elaborate process, but it's basically the same thing, where I have, you can actually see behind me, there's a big Tupperware box. In that is the hard copy version of my latest book. I draw it all out by hand, then I scan it. You can see my enormous fancy scanner. And then after I scan it, I upload it onto my tablet, which is right here, and I can't turn the screen for you to see. I have a Cintiq tablet, and then I do the inking on that. So I have a process, but the point of it is to get me to sit down so I'm not intimidated or dreading it or worried about it. And the second is to have multiple different steps so that I can be free and get the idea out there, because that's the point of it. And a lot of the time, I think you don't really know what you're going to say until you get to the end of the paper. So getting to that place first is really helpful. So that's a kind of a long monologue, but those are kind of the things that I do to write. The other thing that I do is something I tell myself that's helpful. I think in kind of the crush of academia, every single sliver of every moment and everything that we create needs to count for something, because, oh my God, it's time. And I tell myself, writing is something that's always going to count. And it's something you've written is something no one can ever take from you. And that no matter how crappy everything is, writing will sustain you, because it will always be there, and it's your words, and it's powerful. And so when you write, people will say, well, oh, why should I work on this? It'll never be published. Or, oh, I spent a lot of time on this and it'll never. No, it'll always find its home. It may take a while, but it'll always find its home, and it will always be good for you because it's moving you towards those ideas that are important. And, I've, even in my darkest hours, writing has been the thing that, never lets me down. And remembering that, and trusting that you have something to say is also a part of being able to sit down and do it.
That's fun. Fantastic. You answered a lot of the things that I was going to ask you about. I love when interviewees or people you have conversations with are intuitively aware of where you want to go with the conversation. That's very cool. Do you listen to music when you're doing this work?
That's interesting you asked that, because everybody has their weird thing.
Yeah.
When I am doing the inking part, which is what I've been doing now for a year on this new book, which is I have everything drawn out in pencil and I'm just doing the inking on my tablet. I'll see if I can't hold it up for you to see what I work on, this giant thing. It requires a little bit of engagement, but also a little bit of kind of dissociation, if you will, to do it. So I have a Masterpiece Theater program that I run on repeat on my computer. And I just run it. And they're like my friends. They keep me going through the whole thing. And I have the whole thing memorized. It's like 6 seasons. And I watch that and I do it. And, I sit in my office and I watch it, and that's what happens. When I'm writing something with a Word document, so not drawing, I found that I can work in my office okay, but it's a little too quiet. So I have a bunch of apps that generate white noise. And I run those to make some background noise, but I can't watch my Masterpiece Theater program because it has too many words, and it'll.
And you're gonna just repeat the words in your head.
Right, exactly. So I can't only do that while I draw. But the best place to write is Panera.
Right.
We have all these great. I live in Western Massachusetts. We have all these great coffee shops, and they're all cute, and they're independently owned, and they're fantastic. But for some reason, Panera works for me. I don't know why.
There's one during the busy hours, the lunch hour, and
I know I go in the morning when there's nobody there, or it's quiet, and I have a booth that I like,
right? And
I sit there, and I wrote an entire book in that Panera.
But what happens at lunch hour? Are you still writing?
At lunch hour, it gets busy. You have to leave, and they also kick you off the internet there, so it doesn't. That's not good for me because I write in Google Drive. So, so I will work. Like I'll have a routine. Like in summer, I'll try to get over to Panera by 8:30. And I'll work from 8:30 to 12. And then I leave when the lunch rush comes. But there's something about, and this is not an endorsement of Panera. I think their food is awful. But it's something about the space. It just works. And I don't know if it's the noise or whatever. And then usually when I'm formatting, when I'm getting to the point where I'm like moving a lot of paragraphs around or doing the dreaded bibliography, which I still do by hand, even though I have 100 RefWorks programs because I can't, it just doesn't work for me. I do it in my office because I need the big screen and I need my mouse and I need all that other stuff. So there's all these funny little things that I do. And then I always print out the whole thing, hard copy, before I submit it to take it home and read it at home, hard copy, and catch the mistakes, which I catch about, 75%, because the best spell check in the world is hitting send. Then you find all the errors. So that's kind of, that's my sort of routine of so no music, Masterpiece Theater I'm drawing, and one program, there's only one program that works, and I won't tell you which one it is because it's embarrassing. Only one works, or Panera.
And Panera. Well, I've said a lot of the same things to my students, minus the RefWorks bit, because I do
Mhm.
tell them to have a bibliographic software management
I'm
system.
awful. I'm a horrible person. Look, I'm going to move so you can see this. See all this paper? This is the bibliography, and I'm hand typing each one in for the last book I did because I I have like random, look, there's like, I put water on this. It's crinkly because I can't keep, I have Zotero, and for some reason I just can't with it. So I always end up doing my refs by hand. I'm
Uh,
horrible.
I
I'm a
tried
bad
it
example.
when I was a doc student, and this is how this was happening. And I remember writing a paper, and then it took me about the same time to do the bibliography as it took me to write the
Yeah.
paper.
Yeah. It always takes a long time.
And then I was like, there has to be a better way. There just has to be. And then somebody introduced me to EndNote, and I just was, okay. Everybody use something like this. It doesn't have to be EndNote. Just use something like this.
I
And
broke up with EndNote. EndNote bothered me because of all the funny, and I haven't used it for 25 years. So I'm sure it's better now than it was.
yes, it
Like
is.
my bibs, I'll show you how I did my bibs for my book. It's embarrassing, and I'm showing people just so they'll know. Here's my list of my bibs, and then I went through. I have them on hand, and then I went through and like hunted through old documents to try and find. I mean, it's ridiculous, but that's just the way it works.
That's fine. That's the only thing I tell my students not to do.
I do it. I do it. I do it, and I've written like 300-page books.
I know. I know. I mean, for me, like I am so not organized like that. Like I will not be able to find my stuff.
Yeah, I have an organizational
Yeah.
like pathology, so I know where everything.
Yeah, I just won't be able to. So my EndNote has the PDF attached to it. It
Mhm.
has, any notes I have made on it. It's already there with the page number on it. So I know what I have thought about that citation. It's keyworded, smart texted and all of that.
That would be so helpful, but I just can't. I also have to. I mean, I can't like read online. I have to print
Yeah.
everything off because I think I'm just old. I just can't do it.
No, the printing thing off, I do tell my students to do
I
that.
can't. I can't. If I read it on the screen, it's like gone.
Yeah.
But if I read it on paper,
Yeah.
and if I write it on paper, it stays. And that may be why, it took me 15 years to move from writing my books, like it was the 11th century, to writing them using a tablet, which is so much easier. But I couldn't get past I had to buy this, $9,000 thing so that it still has drag, so you feel like you're writing on paper. I mean, it's just, yeah.
Well, yeah. So this is so fun. This is so fun. Yeah. No, I tell my students to take the printout and
Mhm.
always read it at a spot that you didn't write it at.
Yeah. Yeah.
Always and read it very slowly and see what happens.
I read it out loud.
Yeah, read it out loud.
I read it loud to some child or a plant or whoever that's around. And
Wall, anybody, doesn't matter. But read it out loud and read. I tell them to read slowly because then they'll hear their own stuff, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Panera. I have been writing at Panera.
Panera, yeah.
I've been writing at Panera. I have figured out a way to work through the lunch hour rush.
Mm-hmm.
It's on my phone. I have hotspot. So
Yeah,
that's hotspot at lunch hour, and then there's a quiet spot between lunch and dinner. So I do that, and then when the dinner crowd comes, I do again. And I do have my favorite booth that I go.
Yeah, I have one favorite, and if somebody's in my booth, I get really mad.
Yes, I get mad. I get
One time I asked the lady who was there were all these other places to sit, and she was in my booth, and I was like, "Can I share with you? Can I sit here?" And she was like, weird lady. I was like, I really like this booth. She got up and left because she thought I was, a nutball predator. And I have to have
I've done that. Well, I haven't really gone and said, "Can I share with you?" Because there might be implications for me that might be different, than you. But I have gone and sat right next to the table, took away the, outlet, and settled myself so much and took up so much space that it was bound to irritate the person who was sitting at the booth.
Yeah. I mean, I have to have my spot. It just doesn't, like, I can't
write if I'm not on that spot.
I can't do it. And there's so many great coffee shops, and all my friends are like working away at these coffee shops, but I just can't. I have to have that place. It's just psychotic. But it's creative work. I'm a creative person, and I'm entitled to,
have your own.
Like, I've got my thing. It took me a long time to figure out my thing, and now I'm here. So,
I'm here. I'm here to stay.
mhm.
So okay, so let's talk a little bit about challenges. So um, for my students, one of the bigger challenge for them is to figure out how to take a lot of the things that they have collected during their study. So whatever data, whatever way they have understood data. So they have data and they have collected data, and so somehow they have to write up these findings, chapter pieces, whatever, and that has to get integrated with like what was told, what was shared,
Mhm.
with the research purpose in mind, with their theoretical methodological framework in mind. And most of them don't have a lot of background in writing like that. I mean, I didn't, and I don't
Mhm.
know that a lot of us did. And so that's a huge challenge for them, and also very discouraging sometimes, because they'll come and they'll do something and I'll be like, it's not working, and you can't really figure that one out until you actually put it in writing. So there's a considerable amount of effort that goes in from them to do the work. And then I'm like, well, no, it's not good. But then what is good? Well, I don't know what is good until you do something else, then that's good. So I wonder, like, if you can talk about, like, how do you negotiate that in terms of, like, finding a way to share your findings while keeping all these other moving pieces in mind?
I think that part of it is trusting yourself. I do ethnography, so I really, 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 really know my data and my field site. And I spent 1,000 hours in preschool, for example, for my last project, 1,000 hours sitting in doll corner. I know it really well. And I have to say, there's something to be said for trusting yourself. So when I sit down to write, I write like I trust myself, like I know the data, I know the material. But then I always, because you're representing something, you need to go back and check and be thorough. But again, getting that out on the page first, freeing yourself to do that and trusting yourself to write these things is really, really important. And that helps with that challenge. I think the logistical piece of, representing field experience in particular, I can't say enough about taking your time. I like to go really, really fast. In fact, I have a problem because I can't type as fast as I think. And so I'm always struggling with going too fast, but that's just a sign from the universe that I need to slow down. So slowing down is very important. Trusting myself is very, very important. If I'm having a hard time with something, not avoiding it is very, very important. I love my email and social media when I'm really struggling with a piece. And for that, I use a program like Pomodoro, where it makes me sit for 25 minutes and then I get a reward or a prize or a break when I'm done. And that kind of incentivizing and breaking a task down into those 25-minute increments, that works great on really big tasks, on really small tasks, on things you're trying to avoid. Those kinds of structures really help. But again, to go back to the first thing I said, just really trusting yourself and trusting that you know your data, you know your field site. Don't be afraid. Know that you can always edit and change if you go back and you find that it's not quite right. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I handled that challenge in particular. There's also a different kind of writing than a lot of people have done. When I write my comic books, for example, which are a different sort of text, it just writes itself because I'm writing a story. It's a very different thing than academic writing. But if you think about the parts of the storytelling and the parts of that work that come so easily to you and finding ways to incorporate that into your academic writing, that can help also take the edge off some of those problems.
Yeah, one of the things that I find has come up a lot with the students is the fact that they might be able to represent, from the data, but thinking with theory and representing
Yeah.
at the same
Yeah.
that part, because sometimes I'll have creative writers who can put out a scene in no time.
Right.
It's the ethno part of it. It's the theory part of it. The methodological framing, the theoretical framing. Those are the parts that they struggle with the most. Are there ways in which you think about theory as you are doing representation, or is it just in your head and it just comes out?
It's in my head, I think, because the theoretical kind of work that I use is, I change it up a lot, so I always have it in my head. I also think that it's useful to think about theory as a frame, not just because it's a theoretical framework, but as a literal frame for where to put the things you've written, and maybe treating those tasks as those kinds of writing tasks as separate, and then integrating them at a certain stage. So, you have your narrative, you have your vignette, you're writing these things, but how are you going to make it, how are you going to give it theoretical teeth? And taking that and transposing those tasks as two separate things, and as if we're integrating two different thought processes. Because people know their field study, they know that kind of work, but they don't necessarily know their theory in the same way. And that can be remedied by a lot of reading, which I think is really healthy, because good writers know other writers, especially theoretical writers. But it's also a process of integrating those two different ways of thinking and writing, and, to make a seamless, I keep going like this, like to make a seamless whole. And people will figure out what works for them in that regard too.
Yeah, I loved this. I mean, it's so elegant, and yet, why don't I think about this theory as a frame? Like, I mean, of course, it's a framework.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm now thinking what I'm going to do is I'm going to give students a blank page with a box around it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to say, write down some words that come out of your theoretical framework, on the edges of it. And then in between the box, write what you have to do so that it is visually present in these other things around,
and to make it concrete, right? In the new edition of the Shane book, which I'm also working on at the same time, I have a whole new chapter on how you look at theoretical frameworks. And I think about it in terms of like the bones of a house. When you're building a house, and maybe you're going to have wallpaper and cushions and all those other things, but underneath it all, there's a frame that determines the shape. It tells us the shape of the story, or the shape of the way you've dealt with the data, or also someone's skeleton. That's a frame as well that we don't necessarily see, but if you don't have a solid frame, it's not going to work out real good for that person. So again, finding a way to make that framing concrete when it comes to the art and craft of writing.
Yeah, no, I'm teaching a philosophy of inquiry class right now, and I think that's one of the things the students struggle the most, is thinking concretely about something that is so abstract. So this is very helpful. What do you do to up your game?
To up my game. I thought about this question. To up my game. I read a lot. I also teach creative writing here at the university. So I believe that good writers know other writers.
Yeah.
So I encourage students to pick somebody, a scholarly writer, whose style you like, who you want to be when you grow up, and read everything that they write. That's one thing. The other thing that I do to up my game is I read out of area. So I'm always reading something weird. I have weird interests in reading. And that's where I get my really good metaphors for understanding my scholarship. Right now I'm reading a book about bog bodies. Do you know in like Denmark and Germany and England, and the Druids would sacrifice people and put the bodies in the bog, right? And when I was in Copenhagen for a conference in October, I went and saw the bog bodies. It was very gory, and my internal 11-year-old was delighted. I'm reading this weird book, and I'm thinking about like subversion and submersion and all these things in this book. And people say, well, you aren't reading a whole lot about, childhood theory. And I'm like, well, I read that also, but reading this other stuff and getting your head out of it directly improves my writing, because it gives me powerful metaphors and powerful ways of understanding the world around me.
That's awesome.
So I think that that's probably the number one thing that I do to up my game with my writing. We read weird stuff. Lots of weird stuff. I read a lot of nonfiction. When I was writing my dissertation, which was like a torture, I read this book about ants, about social behavior in ants.
I think I did that. You told me, or you?
Yeah, the ant book, right?
Somewhere.
Yeah, and the ants and the caterpillars and the bugs that eat other bugs, these became the central metaphor for my dissertation, right? So keep reading, and don't just read theory and read academic stuff. Read other things.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I have been telling students to read 10 minutes of fiction a day.
Yeah.
Just to read 10 minutes of fiction, but other weird stuff is also good,
Yeah.
I find that a lot of things that we sit and ponder and debate about in education, other creative fields have already figured this out.
Yeah.
In education, we're talking about voice and who
Mhm.
has voice and who can have voice and can you capture voice and
Mhm.
what's all this voice, voice, voice. You
And the
know,
humanities have done it. It's
and
done.
humanities have done it.
Yeah.
You know what? It's an unreliable narrator. Moving on. You know?
Moving on. I had my book that is not the one book I have that doesn't have pictures in it, Wise and Foolish Virgins.
Yeah.
It's all about, I mean, I've got it structured on, using Shakespeare, right?
Yeah.
Because I was an English major. But also because that's the way I think about the world,
Mhm.
is in the humanities. That's how I was trained.
Mhm.
So I like that, finding ways to insert that into our
Yeah.
world.
Yeah. Well, this was extremely helpful and so much fun. I think I'm going to have a horde of students going to
Oh my
Panera
goodness.
Bread to figure out what's the magic at Panera. Both of us talked about it.
I don't know. I was there today. Working on the bibliography pile, and it's just something about it. It's like, bing, time to work. I'm at Panera.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and I know
Thank
my
you.
students would appreciate
Thank
all that you've
you.
shared. Thank
I
you.
hope it's helpful, and it's always great to see you.
Yeah, thank you.